Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Thank you so very much for joining us. Well, President Obama gives his big job speech to Congress. The reception by Republicans has been somewhat cool. All right, we'll talk about the anniversary of the 9/11 attack on America and how it has changed all of us, this country and every single one of us. We'll also talk about whether the Packers are headed for a repeat and whether the Brewers are in the middle of a meltdown. All right, let me introduce everyone. Longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway is the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And education consultant and local job creation expert Gerard Randall. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is President Obama's jobs plan speech. He calls for hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts and new spending, including breaks for small businesses and the unemployed, wants to rebuild aging public schools and hire back lots of teachers. He's a great speaker, but in the divisive environment Washington has been in for years now, you have to wonder, Gerard, if this plan is going to go anywhere.
Parts of it will. There are pieces of the plan that are attractive to Republicans. There are some pieces that simply won't work, and the question that hangs out there is, how do you pay for it? The president said he would ask the new debt commission to take on the responsibility of eliminating an additional $450 billion in debt. If they could do that, then that should have been a part of the original package to begin with, if there's that much flexibility in the federal budget to cut that much. What I think they're going to do is take a look at individual pieces of the package. Pieces like maybe new school buildings will probably get some play, extending the benefits for the unemployed. Some of that will get some play. And then when you get to the reduction of taxes for businesses or incentives for businesses to hire others, that will get a lot of scrutiny because there aren't a whole lot of people that believe that's a real incentive for businesses to hire additional folk onto their payroll. So I think it's going to be a mixed bag for the president. $450 billion, he'll probably get $125 billion of that in some type of support from a Republican House.
Denise, I heard some critics to say today, this is not a jobs plan. This is just another stimulus plan. It's just another re-election speech. Blah blah blah. Yes or no?
No, I mean it's not just blah blah blah. It's an important message that he's sending to the millions of people in this country who are unemployed, the millions of people in this country who are underemployed, for ways for us to begin to get this country back to the point where it needs to be. I think he's been very smart about the way he's approached this, in that he didn't say to Congress, we need to come up with a jobs bill, we need to come up with a plan, and to let Congress do it, because the one thing we've learned about Congress over the past year and a half is that Congress probably could not plan its way out of a paper bag well. It just is not going to happen. So I think he's been smart to take the lead on this, to say this is my plan, to say that it needs to be passed, it needs to be passed now. Look, there's something in there for everybody, but more importantly, there be something in there for Democrats and something in there for Republicans. There's something in there for the American people that's going to be able to get people back to work, get people in a situation where they'll be able to spend money, which will help to stimulate the economy, and that helps to bring us out of this morass that we are in now. It's a good plan. It should be passed. All of it should be passed. You know, I'm amazed how we wonder how we're going to come up with $400 billion, when in fact we have spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars on two wars that we never planned and that we've never had the gumption to put up the money for up front and even pay as we go along. We ought to be able to find $400 million to be able to bring some hope back to this country and to get people back on their feet.
Kevin, I was surprised at how many times last night he kept saying over and over, you have to pass this now. I want you to pass this now. It's almost like he was instructed, just beat on that every other sentence.
I read a report today that it was 17 times that the president said, you must pass this immediately. He's telling Congress that you have to act now when it's a bill that nobody has seen yet. I think there is something, not much, for Republicans to say, maybe the payroll tax cut, which isn't all that much, but the president proposed this knowing it's DOA, Now, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you propose something that had a chance of passage? I'll tell you why, because he's setting Republicans up. He's going to say, look, next year when he's running for re-election and running on a very bad economy, he's going to say, look, it wouldn't be this bad, but the Republicans simply wouldn't go along with my idea. This was extremely political. Before he gave his speech, he sent an email out to his supporters with the title, I'm headed to the Hill, before I head to the Hill. And it ended with, you might want to donate now. Well, this was obviously all a political endeavor. It is another stimulus. It's just make work for the public sector, which didn't work last time. It will prop up existing jobs, and when those temporary jobs go, fixing up school buildings, paving pavements that are already paved, when they're gone, there's nothing for the private sector to say, look, I think as an investor or as a business owner, after listening to the president, I want to go out and build another foundry. I want to open up another restaurant. I want to open up another store. There's nothing in there for private sector job growth where the growth has to be.
How about the fact that some big name Republicans didn't even show up?
Yeah, he calls it political, and then there were Republicans ahead of time that said they were going to boycott the speech. There were Republicans ahead of time that said, we're not going to pass this. It is DOA, just like Kevin's saying. At a time when America needs jobs, that's the number one thing we need. And Republicans are saying we're not going to do anything to create jobs in this country because Barack Obama is president. We don't want the economy to get better. We don't want people in the United States of America to have jobs because we think we can win the next election if this economy is a wreck. And that is un-American. It is evil. It is a terrible political strategy even because the people of America, they saw last night who was saying let's create jobs and who was sitting there, with scowls on their faces saying we're not going to lift a finger to create a job while this man is president. And, for you to call this another stimulus package, you call it another stimulus package, it is another stimulus package. Do you know that it was the first stimulus package that started turning this economy around, that kept us out of a depression, the worst, which this is only the second worst economic crisis we ever had in history. It's not the first worst, which it would have been if we'd followed the Republicans' ideas, let the American car companies collapse, let Johnson Controls here in Milwaukee collapse, let all the other businesses across America collapse that are connected to the car industry, let the banking system fail. These Republicans don't want the economy to get better, and that is evil. That is un-American.
And it's not Republican.
And you know why the
untrue.
You know why right now the economy is stalled? The first stimulus package has now run out. That's why we do need stimulus spending. The private sector you were talking about, Kevin, hasn't created a job. We've given them huge tax cuts.
Because they're overtaxed and overregulated. That's why.
And you know what? We're now losing jobs in the state of Wisconsin. We're laying off teachers. We're laying off firemen. We're laying off police officers.
Those people off.
We are laying them.
Remember, President Obama said we had to pass the stimulus so that we could keep the unemployment rate below 8%. He said that. Where is the unemployment rate now? After that great stimulus
and you may recall that the president wanted to add
job.
more money in the stimulus, and Republicans said no. So maybe that's why
we have a thing on this side of the studio about wasteful spending.
All right, let's spend it.
It's not wasteful to save people's
Well, it didn't
jobs.
create a single job.
It's not. It did. It
didn't
is not
create
wasteful to save
a single permanent job.
Millions of jobs.
Tell
Let's
those
spend
people in
just a few
Detroit
minutes
plants
now.
are now open.
Let's spend just a few minutes now talking about the 10th anniversary of the September 11th attack on America and how it has changed this country. Just as World War II and Vietnam changed those generations, it's pretty accurate to say that this attack has permanently changed this generation, all of us. We are certainly not the same people that we used to be. Do you see any good things that have come out of this in the past 10 years?
Yes. I think first off, while many Americans may not feel safer, there's a more aggressive effort to make us safer. The intelligence community, they're certainly getting better intelligence. An example of that would be some of the intelligence that's led to New York right now, which they believe could be attacked being warned that that's a possibility, and for people, ordinary citizens, to be on alert to make sure that they play a role in protecting themselves and their communities. I think there's better intelligence sharing, not just intelligence gathering, so that those organizations that hadn't coordinated with each other in the past, communicated well with each other in the past, they're doing a much better job of it. I realize that even the FAA was not communicating effectively with our own military, and that led to situations where we could have had innocent Americans on planes being shot down because that communication was not effective on the date of the attacks. So at least from that perspective, our government is doing a much better job of helping to create a better sense of security for those of us.
Everything we've done as a country in the form of anti-terrorism tactics and measures has worked. Initiated by President Bush and continued, to his credit, by President Obama. Why? Because they've worked. All of them. The Patriot Act and the wiretaps and the preventive detention and Guantanamo. It's all worked on it. It has taken maybe some time, and that's because we're not fighting a conventional war here like we did in World War II, where we knew where the enemy was, we knew where they were located. This particular enemy belongs to a religious community that is spread out worldwide, and yet I think in the 10 years we've been pretty successful. There has not been that second major attack that we thought was coming. And for some people to suggest that we have overreacted with everything we've done, I think that's a denigration to our country, its people, its leaders, including President Obama. I give him all the credit in the world for, as critical as he was of the wars that we are still engaged in, he saw what was working and he has continued to implement those policies.
If former Senator Russ Feingold was sitting here, he would say, yes, maybe that's true, but we gave up too many of our civil liberties.
Well, we did, and he was right about that, and I think over time people have recognized he was right about that. I was surprised that this conversation immediately started off on the security measures and the taking away people's civil liberties and keeping people in Guantanamo, which is a horrible thing. People that are held without any right to trial or even being charged with anything. When I think back to 9/11, and I do think of positive things connected to 9/11, I mainly think about how the country came together after that. Democrats and Republicans,
Didn't last
all this, it sure didn't, and I'll tell you why. And I've said this before. President Bush had a chance to be one of the great presidents in American history, because that was a unique time in our history. There was no other time in my lifetime that the country came together like that. And if he had recognized that moment and recognized what we could do together in this country to move forward and become the leader of that, that would have been a great thing. You don't have to be the greatest mind in the world to be promoted to greatness by history, and I think that there was a chance of that. But he didn't understand that, and the only politics he understood was this divisiveness that we're back in now. And not only are we back in it, we're back in it worse than we ever were. President Bush looks like a statesman compared to people in the Congress standing up and yelling at the President of the United States that he's a liar or saying they're not going to create jobs in his country. What if the Republicans and Democrats in this U.S. Congress said, this is America, we can work together to create jobs, to get this country out of this horrible economic crisis, instead of attacking? And instead of saying, I'm not going to lift a finger to do anything to help this president. That was the moment I saw out of 9/11 that gave me great hope, and I'm sorry to say it didn't last very long.
Denise, will we ever feel safe again? Every time you go to an airport and you have to open up your bag and keep your shampoo in little bottles, you're going to be reminded, no, it's not the country it used to be.
It's not the country that it used to be. And I think that the shame in that is that we did lose that opportunity to really find ourselves to be able to unite around a common cause and to be able to try to look at what the greater good and the greater needs were in this country. And we did that for a period of time after 9/11. and we've lost that. So, are we safer? Probably we're safer.
But we can't be perfectly safe.
We can't be perfectly safe. I mean, the reality of it is we couldn't be perfectly safe before 9/11. And we know that from the World Trade Center bombings that took place in the late 1990s.
Like gunshots at the into the facade of the White House
right.
years
So, I mean,
ago.
there's
no place where you're guaranteed
right.
safety.
There's no sense of perfect safety, but the sense of civility that we had towards each other after 9/11 is absolutely gone. And I think as we approach this 10th anniversary, maybe there's an opportunity for us to take a look at what we felt like 10 years ago. Yes, anger and hurt and fear, but there was also that sense that as Americans we can work together and we can overcome things and we can accomplish things. If we had that same kind of philosophy towards the issues that we face now, Republican or Democrat, we would be able to overcome these issues. But unfortunately, it took an act that's so horrific. It's hard to even talk about sometimes for us to be able to reach that point.
But the reality is, here on the 10th anniversary, there has not been another attack in the last decade. Are the Democrats absolutely unable to say that maybe what President Bush and Vice President Cheney and their team did, maybe they did the right thing and maybe those things have worked?
I'm prepared to say that much of what they did worked. I also remember that there was a sense of unity, harmony amongst the political parties and people who are engaged in politics in particular, right after we were attacked. But if you think back to just before the attack and the kind of discourse that occurred then, it was not civil. It wasn't pretty. And much of it was directed against President Bush because they didn't think that he was fairly elected. So, you can only get nostalgic for so far going back before you have to put it in a reality context. And that context was that we had already gone over the cliff when it comes to people behaving nicely toward one another. 911 helped us to refocus, and that refocusing didn't last very long.
But one of the things that unfortunately I say both parties are letting continue. Two wars that were started in the name of 9/11, one against the country that had nothing to do with 9/11, and the other, the Taliban was providing safe havens in Afghanistan, and we went, after that government and got rid of it rather quickly. But here we are a decade later, and we haven't figured out a way to get out of those wars. We haven't figured out a way to stop spending billions and billions of dollars that we need right here creating jobs.
The price tag for the two wars is $1.3 trillion.
Yes.
So it's a lot of money.
Actually, some people put it much higher than that.
But that's 1/11 of the national debt. We're spending 20% of our federal budget on national defense when under the Eisenhower era, we spent 60% of our federal budget on national defense. So I think even though there's been a tremendous cost, our country, because it is safe now, it's been a bargain.
Let's spend that $1.2 trillion on creating some jobs in America, and you can start out with
we're going to spend another
$450 billion.
That the president says, here, you go figure out how to pay for it. I'm washing my hands of it.
He said he's going to tell you how to pay for it.
He will never tell you how to.
Oh, absolutely
All right.
will. We'll see you next week.
Let's shift gears and talk for just a few minutes about sports. Well, the Green Bay Packers looked absolutely fantastic in their game on Thursday, and the optimistic are already saying this team will be in the Super Bowl again. Now, the Milwaukee Brewers, on the other hand, are making folks a little bit nervous with their play against St. Louis and Philadelphia, and some are wondering if this is really a World Series caliber team or if the meltdown has begun.
I don't know anybody that's nervous about that, truthfully. We're playing St. Louis and now Philadelphia. We knew we were playing some of the toughest teams in baseball. With Philadelphia, it's a team that we will have to get past if we're going to get in the World Series. We played them very well the first time we played them. And there's only been one game, and there was only one bad inning in that game. Philadelphia and Milwaukee, to my way of thinking, are really very comparable. I mean, everyone knows Philadelphia has outstanding pitching, but we now have almost as outstanding pitching, and maybe even more so. And the way these, the starting rotations in both of these teams, this is a fun series. I don't think this is anything to be down the mouth about. And besides, everybody's high on the Green Bay Packers after last night, and there's no reason to be not optimistic about anything.
The Brewers are flat right now against teams that they are going to have to maybe face down the road, and hopefully they can snap out of it. I think their lead is such that they should be able to hold on. About the Packers, it is only one game, but I come away from
Every
that.
facet of the game looked great.
But yeah, I come away from that saying, look, if you're going to beat the Green Bay Packers, you're going to have to do two things, and neither of them is very easy. Number one, you're going to have to match point for point with them. You're going to have to light up the scoreboard. And number two, you are going to have to put some pressure on that quarterback. You can't just let him sit back there and throw to one of his 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 weapons. And they have the schedule. If you looked at the schedule, they have a lot going for them, the Packers. Drew Brees in a losing effort was phenomenal. They don't face another quarterback of his caliber until November when they play San Diego and Phillip Rivers. So they have a chance to really have a very, very, very good regular season going into the playoffs.
But I'll tell you what, Denise, when Rodgers went down towards the beginning of the game and the announcer said, "Oh, it looks like he fell on his elbow," you immediately thought, wow, if they lose this guy, the season is over.
You could hear the prayers going up from Packer Nation. I mean, it is a team that seems to have that same kind of spark that it did when it won the Super Bowl.
At the end last year.
There was that feeling on Thursday night that, this is a team that really believes it can accomplish anything. And I'll tell you, talk about Rodgers and the fact that, you've got to be able to pressure Rodgers. That offensive line is just so improved from last year. It's a much better line. It's going to make it much harder for anybody to get to Rodgers. And, I think they have the potential. Again, it's only one game. I mean, we know that. But, boy, that first game really felt good, and it really looked good. The Brewers, the reality of it is they're also playing really good teams now. So we shouldn't necessarily expect that they're going to be able to walk over St. Louis or walk over Philadelphia. These are also great teams who bring a lot to the ballpark as well.
30 seconds, you think the Brewers are going to hang in there?
How about those Badgers? Wisconsin is a state of sports overachievers, and both the Brewers and the Packers have created a lot of excitement in the last 2 years. But the Badgers also went to the Rose Bowl. They're picked not just to go back to the Rose Bowl, but some even think that they are competitive for a national championship.
All right. One more view now on what to make of the September 11th anniversary. Rick Horowitz understands that we live in a very different country now. But some of the biggest recent threats to our security, he says, are coming from totally unexpected directions. Rick.
The man who did this, the monster who did this, is dead, finally. His body is decomposing somewhere in the North Arabian Sea, which means, unless he stashed away one more videotape just in case, we won't have to listen to Osama bin Laden gloating on the 10th anniversary of his murderous deeds. That's good news. Bad news is that some of what he said on his earlier tapes is still pretty much on target, and in ways even he couldn't have imagined. I'm thinking in particular of a bin Laden videotape from November of 2004. It was the first message he'd put out in nearly 3 years. That's where he said that his plan was to bleed the United States to death economically, to make us spend so much trying to defeat him, trying to chase him down wherever, his words, wherever anyone raised a piece of cloth that said Al-Qaeda on it, that our economy would eventually collapse into bankruptcy. Now, by 2004, we were already in trouble in Iraq. Iraq was the extra war, the unnecessary war, on top of the war in Afghanistan. We were spending billions of dollars every week on the two wars, all of it borrowed money, all of it on the national credit card. And we had cut taxes twice. It's hard to have a strong economy when you're that deep in debt. Bin Laden was onto something. And since then, the unpaid bills have only piled up since then. We're talking trillions now. But here's the part bin Laden couldn't have predicted, that politicians of a certain stripe, politicians right here in America, would use that enormous debt as an excuse to weaken us even further, to dismantle programs they'd never liked to begin with, to shrink the government, in the famous phrase, until it was small enough to drown it in the bathtub, cutting back on education and scientific research, the kinds of things that grow an economy, cutting back on maintaining our roads and rails and bridges and ports, the kinds of things that support an economy, cutting back on protecting investors and protecting consumers, the kinds of things that build confidence in an economy, and then threatening default unless they get their way. We're doing all that to ourselves, not in his wildest dreams. 10 years after 9/11, Osama bin Laden is gone. But you might have to say that terrorists are winning.
Thank you, Rick. Right now, we'd like to extend an invitation to join Milwaukee Public Television, Channel 10, on Sunday for a live concert broadcast from Cathedral Square Park here in Milwaukee. The Milwaukee Chamber Orchestra and the Bel Canto Chorus will commemorate the anniversary of 9/11 with what promises to be a beautiful program. It begins at 3 o'clock p.m. right here on Channel 10. Thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.